and welcome to the 16th episode, OMG, of When Life Feels Messy.
Happy Sweet 16.
Oh my gosh, literally. Yes. So, if you couldn't tell from the title, we're going to be delving into a spicy topic today.
Extra spicy. Check the jalapeno icon on your menu. We warning you right now.
Yes, fair warning, extra spicy.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to be delving into navigating difficult parent relationships as an adult child. And we have some information about that, not just clinically, but for me as an adult child
Yeah.
with a parent,
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Well, I think it's like maybe even disclaimer right before we get into this. Like, in no way, shape, or form are we saying that every adult child has a difficult relationship with their parents, right? Some of you might have like really awesome, secure parents out there that have worked on their own stuff, and like
Yes.
repaired relationships, acknowledge the stuff that they did that might have been hurtful. Great. Love that for you. This might not be your episode.
Yeah.
And also, what we see most commonly is that's not the common thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're gonna talk about some things that might feel really gross, that might feel like
Mm-hmm.
I don't even want to acknowledge this right now, or hearing us call it out might be like a WTF moment a little bit.
Yeah.
But also probably necessary if you're having a reaction to what we're saying here. So
Very true. Very true.
don't say we didn't warn you. Like, this is your chance. Back out now, right?
Yes.
And also, too, like, it's gonna be a good episode.
It's going to be a great episode because knowledge is power. Okay.
Knowledge is power. Where's the dun 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 no noise?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's really important that we start off with defining what could be looked at as a difficult parent, quote unquote.
Oh yeah.
So
And this
for
is
the
gonna sound harsh. This is gonna
yeah,
sound harsh.
it's gonna sound harsh. And I also want to share that a lot of this information has been researched and developed a lot of evidence-based treatments
Yeah.
when dealing
Lots
with
of
these
books.
types of, lots of books.
Lots of books on the topic. This is definitely, I feel like, and you correct me if you're wrong, or if I'm wrong. Oh,
I'm
but
wrong.
I feel like this is definitely something even throughout like my life that I've seen come up more and being called out is just the not being like, oh, that's my parent, right? So I just like whatever they say goes and it's the right way and they're like the whole wisdom like sorcerers that I go to, but actually being like, oh, my parent's a human. And sometimes they made decisions and did things that was not helpful, right? Or even positive. And being able to call that out and recognize how that shows up for you and the impact even today as an adult child, like that's
Exactly.
important.
Yeah, and figuring out how you want to respond to that versus react. But we'll get into that later. So, the research and literature defines these difficult parents as emotionally immature. So, we're going to be using an acronym throughout this pod called an EIP.
Yep.
For
Sounds
emotionally what?
It sounds cooler than it is.
Yeah. EIP, emotionally immature parent. So, what exactly does that encompass? Let's break it down. So, this is a parent that never gives their child what they needed emotionally. And this could feel like, well, I'm a child. I don't know what I need emotionally. And maybe even feel that you even feel that way now. And that's a sign. So let's just hold on to that.
Yeah.
Secondly, They do not have the ability to deal with their emotions in a healthy way.
Yeah. There is no emotional regulation here.
None. There is mainly reactions with like anger or shame or versions of gaslighting happening. Next, they lack effective coping mechanisms to regulate their emotions and maintain competent functioning in stressful situations. So, again, unable to regulate their own emotions, maybe place that responsibility on others. Major yikes.
Major yikes.
Also, they cannot control their emotions because they're too focused on themselves to care about their children's needs.
Ugh.
I know. I just had the word ill. Like, ill. Come
it was gross typing that on here because it's like, I don't think anyone wants to think about a parent in general, like kind of approaching like their children that way. And also like, it's actually pretty common that we see that and that children feel that way.
Yes. Yeah. So we're going to be talking about 4 different types of EIPs. And although that there's 4 different types, they all have limited capacity for empathy and are unreliable emotional supporters of their children, and they lack sensitivity.
Yep.
Again, let's go back to the definition: immature.
Yeah.
And I know that word has like a lot of negative vibes around it.
Right. Yeah.
But it's also like a lack of development.
Yes, right. Like if you actually like break it down to what that word means, but I think because it, at least I feel like growing up immature was used as such a like negative, dismissive, demeaning thing.
Yeah.
Like that it kind of changed it. So now even like saying the word feels really gross. But like if you break it down, like it literally just means like a lack of maturity, right?
Yes.
Like, and so keep that in mind, right? Like this is not for you to feel like, oh my gosh, Aaron and Ash are just coming at my parents right now, right? Like this is not that, but this is saying like if you have a parent that technically, right, like falls into that emotionally immature parent category, there is something that is lacking in terms of maturity, most specifically with the emotional capacity.
Exactly. Yes.
And so, and also too, I think it's important to note of, although, right, like this could be something that you think about when you were a child and how your parents like, you know, reacted and like what you saw growing up. Like one, this could very well still be how they act and treat you, right? Even as an adult. Two, your parents might have worked on their stuff, right? Like they might have like kind of approached things in your childhood and growing up like IEP kind of area, or now they might have like grown and realized like, oh, this is where I needed to do some work, and you might have a totally different relationship or view on your parent now. Okay, so kind of transitioning here. As Ash mentioned, there are 4 types of EIPs that have been identified. And each of these, I mean, we can kind of see, right? Like, I can even think about, if I think about like my own parents or like friends' parents that I like knew like about growing up, like I'm like, oh yeah, like I could see this like almost play out in like different dynamics and things that I would hear. And so it's interesting to be like, okay, like this is actually like something that I'm like, oh, like I knew that felt gross, right? But I didn't necessarily think like that's not okay. But now it's like, actually, this showing up as one of the types kind of indicates, right? Like there was something that was kind of lacking or going on. And so it's just so interesting. Anyway, that was like my little side rant. But the first one is emotional parents, right? Which, as it sounds, we can already put 2 and 2 together. These are parents that are really driven by their feelings, right? And so you might already thinking about like if you had a parent or you know about like a parent or adult in your life that was really quick to overreact, or we almost had to like walk on eggshells around because we were scared that they might be too fragile or how they would react to things and situations. Like we knew that they would get upset really easily. Like this is definitely right, like that EIP of we're not really sure what's going to happen here or what's going to set it off. So what happens in this is that because we have a parent that doesn't really have this like regulation of their emotions and they're kind of all over the place, is the family outside of that parent or both parents, right? If you have both parents that are emotional, that could be a thing. The family kind of tends to take on the role of soothing them. And so then you as a child kind of learn probably pretty quickly on in your life that I am responsible for someone else's emotions, right? And I almost take on that role of being aware of how do I make sure X, Y, and Z parent isn't triggered is okay, because that equals homeostasis in my family system, right? And so thinking about like the mood that you probably noticed from that parent like shifted pretty quickly, right? And could be like they were very overly involved, like helicopter parent wanting to be all up in the business, to like really cold and dismissive in a matter of seconds. Like you could probably visibly see a change in their body language, in their face, like their tone, all the things. And so like we said, like thinking about like that major of a mood shift and how quickly it can change, like that's gonna make our home environment very stressful. It's unpredictable. That's where the walking on eggshells comes in. And if any of you are listening and you know that feeling of walking on eggshells around someone, it is a horrible feeling that just brings on so much stress and anxiety for you, right? To be thinking about, I almost have to like second guess and think about everything that I say or do while in the presence of this person.
Exactly. Right? And then people want to wonder why they grew up an anxious child.
Right. Yeah, and it's like, I can think of some reasons why, but okay. But in thinking about like a emotional parent, right? Like this is something where instead of the child being able to rely on them for emotional support, teaching them to regulate, stabilizing them when they're going through their own things, it's reverse, right? Like the parent actually relies on the child to do this, and you can already think about how that dynamic works, especially if you're listening to this as an adult that basically was ingrained from a young age to be responsible for your parent, right? Like, so thinking about that, right? Like, it is not surprising, right, of this category of emotional parent, that a lot of emotions and mood swings and unpredictability was probably present in your life growing up and maybe even still today, right? Again, if parents have not worked on their stuff, then they're probably exhibiting these same things. It might just be different if you're not living under their roof anymore. So
yes. So what's coming to mind with this one is something that you've shared with me as I'm doing my own work, my own personal work, is that children with these parents often thrive in chaos.
Oh, yeah.
As we can multitask different, not just external things, but emotions, relationships. And when everything is calm waters, right? Then we get fearful or scared because anything could happen.
Right.
But that's my little tidbit on that.
No, I love that you brought that up. One, like I love when I get to drop that little baby bomb of why are we like addicted to the chaos right now? Like where did that feeling of chaos is a normal part of my day-to-day or needed in order for things to be okay come from. And I think, right, like that emotional parent like is like the perfect storm for that to develop. Because if
Oh,
there
yeah.
is no unpredictability or walking on eggshells around people, like our brain has wired that as a normal thing. So when we don't
Exactly.
have that, then we start internalizing, right? Of like, oh, this is
Yes.
actually not okay. This is not a healthy relationship, right? And it's like,
Yes.
hold up, actually, it is. So I'm glad you brought
Yeah.
that up. Moving on to the second one. This is driven parents, right? And so something that I think is important that I didn't think about, but when I was researching this, I'm like, oh, I could literally see how this plays out, right? Is that normally if the parent falls under this driven parent category, like they probably seem really normal, like on the surface, like they're probably really involved and invested in their children's lives. Like you probably would hear people say like, oh my gosh, like that parent's at every sporting event, every like thing that the child does, they're like in the bleachers, they're watching, like, and it's like, okay, I could see, right, where that would look like a good thing, right? Like a healthy
Yeah.
thing. But the problem is that underneath that surface level is a lack of empathy for their child, right? Like they're not adapting to their children's needs or nurturing an emotional connection with them, but rather they are imposing very high standards upon their child. Like they're very critical, they're demanding of them, they are very controlling and intrusive of children's lives. And the like number one thing example that I could think of is like think of the stereotypical movies where the
Mm.
main character is a football player and he wants to do something else and the dad's like, no, like you need to do this, you're gonna get scouted, think of your future. And there's a lack of empathy or even care about what the child actually wants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's exactly what this is, right? Like, in most of the times, it's not even that parents are, consistently like on their children, like, you got to do this, you got to do this, like 24/7, just walking right behind them. Like, a lot of the times the parents are off doing their own thing, or they're busy, or they're distracted, or they are physically and emotionally unavailable, unless it's those pivotal moments that usually is when their reputation like comes into play of like
Yeah.
people seeing them at every event, right? Or people seeing this supportive, or my child is successful, because that's what they care about. Like main priority is to raise successful kids, right? And this is at any cost, including their child's own needs. And I think if we even like dug into that a little bit further, which might be a rabbit hole, but I think is important, what might that signify, right? As if a parent feels like their child has to be successful and they have to raise a successful child that follows these strict, high demands and standards, what does that say about the parent's own idea of their worth?
Exactly. Yes.
And that can get really sticky.
Yeah, it's giving me very egocentric, very
Mm-hmm.
neurotic vibes from the parent.
Yeah.
And my initial thought when listening and reading this and preparing is like, yes, it's the athletic parents. It's
Mm,
the high performance children with those parents that seem like they are full throttle supportive.
mhm.
But then it also, just listening to you now, brought up very like religious communities and their
Mhm.
children and
Yeah.
standards that they have for their children staying within the church
Mhm.
or
Mm.
living within these standards. And that's really difficult.
Yeah. That is, I mean, I think that's a whole thing, like I'm glad you tapped into, of even thinking about what a successful look to said parent, right? Because you're right. Like if it's someone that like is really into like, I wanted to have a son that would be drafted to the NFL and like carry on the family name in that way, or it's someone that's very involved in a religious organization, very involved in a faith of some kind, and successful means, right, following X, Y, and Z, like biblical religious standards and having a life that follows that mold,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's the
Yeah.
part too of, it could be any number of things, right? Depending on what the parent deems successful and important. But I think the emphasis is on the child's wants, needs, emotions are not cared about. It's not taken into consideration because what the parent thinks is best or what they want is what matters.
Ooh,
I know.
that is what you just said, that sentence right there. That is a cultural norm across a lot of different cultures. The child's voice does not matter.
Yeah. Oh, the
And
child is to remain silent, right? I know
yeah,
growing up in a religious organization, I heard that all the time, right? Like, we are to be seen, not heard. And I think that that can even be translated to a lot of different areas, right? Of what's important for people, of this idea that children are just a means for me to further, like, mark my reputation and success. And if they don't follow X, Y, and Z, then that completely almost like taints or tarnishes my like ethic or like even worth as a person.
yeah. Ooh, love
I
that we're
know.
making these connections, but again, here's the spiciness that we were talking about.
Yeah, very spicy. If you're needing to take a break, take a break. Like, don't listen to this all together because this is a lot. Like, I'm finding myself having like a visceral reaction a little bit, and I'm like over
Me
here, like
too.
deep breathing. Like, we're pausing. Y'all are hearing this all at once, but we are pausing. Like, we
Yeah.
are some pauses because it is a lot, right? And like, you're probably hearing this and it's touching something, right? It's resonating in some way, and let's just validate and acknowledge that and say like, yeah, this shit's hard. So
Exactly.
but moving right along to the third category, is passive parents. And I feel like, at least maybe for me, and you tell me if it was different for you, but I feel like in my like upbringing, like where I like grew up in a very small rural area, I saw a lot of, either you were a driven parent and that was deemed as the good thing, or you were a passive parent and that was a bad thing. And it's like, oh, like, why are these the only two options right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so thinking about like passive, I'm sure like you already have an idea, right? Listening to this of what that looks like. And if you thought of, I'm gonna Mean Girls reference right now. If you thought of Regina's mom and how like no boundaries, like almost living her life vicariously through Regina, letting her do whatever, not wanting to have any kind of conflict or stress, then that is a passive parent. Like, congratulations, you won
Yeah.
the quiz.
Yes.
Because that's exactly what it is, right? Like, passive parents do not want to engage or have any type of conflict or stress. They are going to avoid it at all costs. And they're going to be really easy to get along with because they are very much, I'm going to go with the flow and cause little disruption to anyone, right? And I think this was
Yes.
something that was almost like romanticized a little bit of like, oh, like that's the cool parent. That's the parent that like lets us do whatever. Like, there's not boundaries of telling us what we can't do, like X, Y, and Z. And it's like, I mean, I guess as a child, I could see that in some regards. And also, too, like looking at it, knowing the info I have now, and as an adult, like, how impactful was that, and not in a good way?
Exactly. Yeah. This is reminding me of a past client with a passive parent
Mm-hmm.
who would often put adult or major decisions on the kid to make because the parent didn't want to, quote unquote, create conflict.
Yeah.
And didn't want to be responsible for that decision, even though it was an adult decision.
Right. Yes. No, that's 100% right. And that's the part where I think like almost gets like skirted under the rug because it's like so exciting that I get to do whatever I want. But in reality, you are being almost like coerced into the adult parent role. And it probably doesn't even feel like it until it feels like it, right? Because passive parents, like they cannot set healthy boundaries, right? They cannot have honest conversations because to do that would mean I am going to come across some things that could be confrontational, could have conflict, could have stress. They're not going to do that, right? And they're not going to be able to stand up for themselves or their children. And think about that for a second. Like growing up with a parent that you didn't feel like you could rely on them to be a safe place or someone that protects you, right? How does that impact you as an adult? Right? Because you're often left like to fend for yourself. You learn, I am the only one that I can rely on. I can't trust in anyone else. Like probably even sometimes that looks like a weakness, right? Depending on like how that was kind of spurned. And also a really common thing is that if you grew up with or in a intimate partner domestic violence type situation, whether it was, your parents or, your parent and a new partner, whatever it may be, right? That parent, right, one of them might be passive in terms of they know that there's physical, emotional, mental harm going on, and they're going to ignore it because what is that? That's conflict, right? So growing up in a situation like that where there might have been an abusive person in your household, if you had a passive parent, you probably didn't feel protected or even like really like validated, seen, heard like by that person. And that's a hard spot to be in.
Very, very. Ooh.
And I think like I hear that a lot come up just like in my work of just how common passive parent is when there is like domestic violence as part of it. And working with children of a passive parent that was in that situation, it's a lot. It's a lot of layers. It's a lot of things to process and almost rewire. And so although, right, like the passive parent might be romanticized and kind of seems like the cool thing when you're younger, like it has very damaging effects and things that the adult children of that have to work through or they will repeat said patterns. But now we're at the last one, which is rejecting parents. And as it sounds, right, these are parents that usually spend very little, if any, time with the family. The interactions that they have are probably very few in between. They probably feel very formal and impersonal, right? Probably cold. And they want to be left alone, right? They probably isolate a lot. This is probably the parent that like never really went to anything that you had going on, right, in your life, would like come home from work if they worked, right, and would like go straight to their room and do their own thing, like don't really do family outings, because again, this is a rejecting parent. This is someone who, the way I almost interpret it as like really rejects that role of being like a parent caregiver to their children.
Ooh.
I know.
Yeah.
That was gross coming out. I'm sorry.
No, it's
Sorry
fine. It's
hit
fine.
in any way.
It's hitting hard, but it's fine.
Okay,
I
we're
think
gonna
it's
breathe
good
through
to
it.
talk about it. Yeah, it's good to talk about it.
Yes, it is. It is important to talk about, right? Like we have to put awareness around it, and also we can acknowledge if it feels really hard to say out loud. So, but thinking, even more so about it, like a rejecting parent and the child, how that dynamic feels, right? Like, you are probably never really gonna feel comfortable around them, or you never did feel comfortable, right? Like, so children of rejecting parents are going to feel really uncomfortable around them. You are probably like would have thought or still think right today that this person doesn't even think about you, right? Like, you are unimportant in terms of their life, the energy that they put into anything. And that's because of these interactions that you had growing up where they showed little to any tolerance or empathy for you or anyone else's needs, right? Like, the interactions that you probably did have with them, granted, right, really few and far in between, probably only consisted of them telling you what to do, right? Issuing commands, blowing up at you, right? Or then isolating themselves from the family. So the interactions probably weren't positive if you did have interactions with them. And this makes me think of like something like I had a childhood friend, and like her stepdad literally, I think in I mean, now I've known her for 20 years, but like the times, like the amount of sleepovers I would go, like the things we would do together, I think I saw him twice. Like, and like this was
Oh,
probably
wow.
over like a 6-year span, I
Oh,
think.
wow.
And
Mm-hmm.
because it was like no interaction with like them at all,
Yeah.
like would come home, go game in the room, like would order their own dinner, like never came to family functions, birthday parties, nothing. And so it's like it's just so interesting of like,
Mm.
yeah, like it
Mm-hmm.
feels even for me like as being a friend of someone and going over to the house, like it felt weird for me. So like I can only
Right.
imagine like how that was
Mm-hmm.
to essentially have like a parent caregiver in your house, but you don't even like have that relationship or have the interaction with them to even call them that.
Exactly.
It's like there's a body in this
Exactly.
house, but I don't really know that person, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the 4 EIPs.
Ooh.
Fun
Thank you for
time.
sharing those. Yes.
Welcome.
As you were sharing them, and like now, before we move on to the next section, I'm coming up with this weird feeling of like curiosity
Mm.
and compassion as to how people become these types of parents.
Oof. Yeah,
That's a whole nother podcast.
that is a whole other podcast. Yeah. I think to give a simple answer, right? Like in purpose of this is that people are what they see and learn and how they figure out how to survive and cope and adapt. And I think that that is very telling of really taking into consideration what parents' own upbringing and life look like.
Yeah.
What were they taught by their parents in terms of emotional regulation and how to treat and respond to your children? And also, like, knowing too, if there's domestic violence and intimate partner violence involved, like, it changes the game. It has an impact. People that might really set out to be secure, positive, emotionally mature parents
Mm-hmm.
might quickly take on a passive, rejecting, like emotional parent role.
Yeah.
Because we're all humans, right? And that's a part of it is your parents are human and they did what they did, right? With what they had.
Yeah. And it's also interesting how, like, there's these four types, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, some of these seem like the exact opposite of each other. Almost
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, I was raised with a um emotional parent, and now I'm so scared of doing that. I'm going to lean towards the passive traits because I'm
Mm-hmm.
so afraid of conflict.
Oh
And yet
yeah.
that comes with its own repercussions and consequences.
Yeah. I think that's the perfect sum up of black or white thinking that a lot of times we develop, right? Is that this felt really horrible and I hated going through this, so I'm going to go to the exact opposite end of the spectrum extreme. And that's not effective either. It's just different. So it probably feels okay. And that's where we get sticky because it can't be just one or the other. Like there's a middle area that we have to find the balance in.
Yeah. So let's switch gears a little bit. And we've kind of talked about this as you were sharing. But these signs that you, as the adult child, grew up with an EIP. So something that you may notice about yourself is that you feel emotionally lonely around your parent.
Mm-hmm.
EIPs like to tell children what to do, but are uncomfortable with emotional nurturing.
Yep. It's going to seem fake.
Yeah, it's going to seem fake. It's going to seem not genuine. They may seem awkward when they try to soothe you or give you support or assurance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's normal for an EIP.
Yeah. And I think something too, like something that's popping up in my head, right, is like hearing that. I think sometimes in a place of hurt as the child, right, it can be like, oh my gosh, like, why doesn't my parent like care or love me enough to be able to nurture me, right, or to put in effort? And something I think is important to remember is if your parent wasn't taught this or even like learned that, hey, the way I was taught and treated growing up was not okay, they can only go off of the knowledge that they have, right? Which is why we say all the time, knowledge is power.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. And I think that that's important of sometimes to even say like, this is not just because like your mom June just hated your guts, right? And wish you were never born. A lot of the times this has more to do with they don't know how to be parents in a way that you need because they didn't have parents that they needed.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Love, knowledge is power. We need to make that a mental health sticker.
Coming soon.
Another sign is that your interactions with your parent may feel one-sided and frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
They're likely to talk over you, to change the subject, start talking about themselves, or dismiss what you're saying when you try to share something important to you.
Oh yeah, it'll always feel like they're gonna trying to one up you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like they're listening to respond.
Exactly.
Children of EIPs often know more about their parent issues than the parents know about them and their issues.
How many of you are your parents' therapists? Raise your hand.
Mm-hmm. Actual yikes. They require your attention when they're upset, but rarely offer listening or empathy when you're distressed. They offer superficial solutions, and I've heard clients describe this as like just throwing money at them or throwing like material things at them.
Yeah.
Tell you not to worry or even get irritated with you for being upset, for having emotions, for being sad or angry.
Ultimate deflection.
Yeah.
Because they can't handle it. They can't hold that space for it.
And often because they can't do that for themselves, like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Adult children of EIPs often feel coerced or trapped. The parent may insist you put them first and let them run the show because you're still a child in their eyes.
Yep.
Ew. They may coerce you with shame, guilt, or fear until you do what they want, as like, I brought you into this world, I could take you out type of stuff. Ugh, so gross.
Ugh.
These parents often do whatever is necessary to feel more in control and protected, oblivious to the cost of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Talking to them is often boring. They stick to conversation topics that feel safe, surface level,
Yes.
which becomes stagnant, and topics that they are interested in learning about from you.
Right. Or topics like even like stories that highlight things about them, right? Like they're really proud of. Like I literally can think of an uncle right now that every holiday it's the same topics about things that they think makes them sound good. And it's
Right.
gross.
Yeah. Yeah. These parents often feel like they come first and you are secondary. Everything is always about them, making them happy, making sure they're regulated,
Mm-hmm.
making sure they're not upset, running things by them first. They expect you to accept second place to their needs, elevate your own interests to the point that yours feels downgraded.
Ew. And what does that teach you? What does that teach you, listeners?
I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. I'm unlovable. We can just continue the list.
Literally. That's a whole other episode.
It is. They want to build an allegiance to their needs coming first and not looking for an equal relationship. And I think this is where cultural norms really play a big role.
Mm-hmm.
As like we mentioned earlier, children often don't have voices.
Yeah.
They're not respected in their opinion or what they need or want because the parent has a more quote unquote developed brain for emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And that can really shape how your brain is molded when you're in adulthood.
Yeah.
It often leaves you feeling insecure, vulnerable to stress, anxiety, and depression. They won't be emotionally intimate or vulnerable with you. They are highly reactive emotionally, avoid deeper feelings, will discourage children from expressing their feelings or talking about them freely. Like, you only talk about these with this one person behind closed doors,
Mm-hmm.
or go to your religious leader to talk about that stuff with.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, they can't hold space for it. They can't do this within themselves. So they're going to discourage their children not to do it so that they don't have to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. I think this is really important to note here is the EIPs fear being emotionally exposed and they hide behind a defensive exterior, which
It's a
is
lot of defensiveness.
it is. They avoid tenderness towards their children because this might make them too vulnerable. Worry that showing love might undermine their power as parents because power is all they can think about and all they feel like they got.
Mm-hmm.
And traditionally, when you think of power, I know we've been using this quote, knowledge is power, but sometimes even the word power feels like there's some weird vibes to it too. Like I'm in control over you or I'm in control over them, when really it's I'm empowered within myself. I have this inner power of controlling how I want to show up from the best of me. And sometimes, especially within these parents, the best of them is too scared and not willing to take those steps.
Yeah.
The emotions they are okay with showing are those intense emotions like anger.
Yeah.
Or frustration. Or they just go full throttle, crazy monster mode,
Going after kids.
going after kids, maybe, as they say, quote unquote, see red.
Mm-hmm.
Like they let that anger just fuel their whole being and do things that keep them in this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
One-sided eruptions of emotion are merely releases of emotional pressures. That's what's happening in those moments.
Mm-hmm.
Anger is one of the easiest emotions to lean into for some people. They may stiff arm you if you try to comfort them.
Yeah.
Because they're not used to it. Yeah.
Feels gross.
They communicate through emotional contagion. They will try to attempt to cross your boundaries and get you as upset as they are. And this is just another sign of the absence of unhealthy boundaries or healthy boundaries, my bad, of healthy boundaries. Because if like I'm feeling this certain way and I'm feeling hurt and angry, then I want you to also feel that way too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, so gross. OMG.
Mm-hmm. Misery loves company.
Yeah. They want you to intuit what they are feeling without them saying. So mind readers.
Yes. Mind readers.
Mind readers. How? How? Tell me the technology of doing that.
If you care about them, you'll just know.
Oh. They feel hurt, angry when you don't guess their needs and know exactly what they need or want, right? Expecting you to know exactly what it is. They protest that they didn't tell you will result in reaction. If you really love me, like you said, you would know.
Mm-hmm.
The math isn't mathing there for me. It's just not mathing.
The math don't math on any of this. Again, that's where that immature part comes in.
Yeah.
The math ain't math.
I think also that piece right there is just another domino of I'm in the world like you are responsible for my feelings and I'm responsible for your feelings. And hashtag not okay. EIPs don't respect your boundaries or individuality. They want you to stay conform. They want you to stay in mesh with them. They don't understand the point of boundaries. Boundaries imply rejection to them, meaning that you don't care enough about them to give them free access to your life.
Can we take a pause? Because I feel like I hear this all the time, right?
Yes.
Okay, people don't respect my boundaries, or like I tell them this and then they get upset and offended and then they make me feel bad for setting the boundary. Okay, hold up. Because you setting a boundary isn't a bad thing. The harmful part is someone else's reaction to you setting a boundary with them. And can we take a second and actually look and hold them accountable for what do they take on as me doing a protective boundary for myself and how that means for them, such as it's a rejection, right? I don't care about them. And that's not the case, right? That's not true. And I'm not responsible for them feeling rejected or for them feeling that I don't care enough about them.
Exactly. Mic drop on that. They will act incredulous, offended, hurt if you ask them to respect your privacy and feel loved only when you let them interrupt you at any time. Again, control, power.
Yes. Has anyone watched I Love a Mama's Boy on TLC? Watch it. And then you come back to this and tell me this ain't that.
Exactly. Yes. They seek to feel dominant and privileged in roles in which they don't have to respect others' boundaries. So, again, a one-sided relationship.
A one-sided, yep.
And EIPs truly don't understand why you should want space or an individual identity apart from them, why you can't just be like them or think like them or have the same beliefs or values as them. You are their child, so you belong to them. You literally came from their body.
Mm-hmm.
I'm cringing right now. And they expect you to remain compliant and follow their advice.
Yeah. And if you don't, that is an ultimate attack on you against them. And you don't care and love them enough. And
exactly.
Just, ew. Ew.
Major ew.
But again, I think that goes back to, right? Like, if we're looking at the immature part, right? This is a lack of, like, having that empathy or wanting your child to develop into a person that's unique and individual and figures out whatever they want. And that doesn't feel okay because it feels like an attack if they don't copy exactly what you did. Because then somehow that means you're not enough. And it's like, that's disgusting. Okay.
Very.
Can be another rant, but I'm going to continue on. Yeah. So you are going to feel like you do the emotional work in the relationship, right? Like, and I think that that's been something that hopefully has been pretty evident, is that EIPs do not do emotional work unless it's anger, unless it's blowing up, right? Like, they're not going to do the emotional work. They're not going to take accountability. Like, there is a lack of interest in their part to have reconnection efforts and relationship repairs. They're going to have that fall on you. You're going to go into this, like, almost be forced into this role where you learn, and it gets wired in your brain that you have to do all the work in the relationship. It's your job to fix it. And how many of you have had relationships where you show up like that? And how did it go? Anyway, moving on. They're gonna make things worse, right? By projecting this blame. They're gonna accuse everyone else. They're going to not take accountability or own up to their own behavior. They're gonna be very adamant that it was something that you did. You did this or you didn't do this, and that's why their hurtful behavior was warranted. And the problem wouldn't have occurred unless you as the child would have known better and done what they asked. So again,
Lord.
no accountability, nothing
None.
in that regard. You're going to feel like you lose your emotional autonomy and mental freedom, right? Because EIPs are completely disregarding your whole inner world of thoughts and feelings. Like we just said, the idea of you as the child having your own unique, separate thoughts, ideas, opinions, values from them seems like an attack against them. So they're not going to be okay with that. You have to copy them. You got to fit the mold and do what they say and what they think is best. They're going to claim the sole right to judge your feelings. And this is judging them as either they're sensible or they're unwarranted. And they're not going to respect your emotional autonomy with this, which is your freedom and right to have your own feelings. That's not okay unless they line up exactly how they feel, right? Your thoughts should reflect theirs exactly. And if they don't, they're going to come at you with this shock and this disapproval. They're going to act like your ideas have offended them, right? Because again, it feels like an attack against them and their character as a person and that they're not enough. You're not free to consider certain things, even in the privacy of your own mind. And something that, like, when I was researching this, I didn't even think about, but how many of you grew up, right? And one of the things that your parents said was, like, don't even think about it, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah. Actually, okay, I see what you're doing there, right? Like, your thoughts and feelings are filtered through their comfort level as either good or bad. Not vice versa. It is merely yours are filtered by what they can handle or not handle. essentially, right? They can be killjoys and sadistic. They're rarely going to resonate with anyone else's feelings. They're not going to take pleasure in other people's happiness, right? Like, this might be one of those times where you try to share really good news or exciting news and they're going to try to one up you, right? They're going to react in ways that take the shine off of the child's pride. They're very famous for deflating like a child's dreams of things by reminding them about the depressing realities of adult life, right? Like popping that balloon real quick. They're rigid and they're always right. It's impossible for them to change their minds once they formed an opinion on something. And criticism or different opinions are going to make them like 0 to 100 defensive and emotional. Good. Someone who has a lack of emotional maturity is not going to take criticism at all or feedback at all. It is always going to be defense against it because you're attacking me and you're a bad person now. They're either too controlling or they don't care at all, right? Like, it's, again, that black or white thinking. We're on one end of the extreme or the other. So they tend to be parents that are autocratic, authoritarian, strict, narcissistic, right? Like, they're going to set rigid rules and control every aspect of their child's lives. Or they're going to be so uninvolved that they show little interest in their kids' lives. They're neglectful and they set no rules or expectations. They also may abuse substances, right? Emotional dysregulation is a high predictability of substance abuse behavior, and they're more prone to drug abuse. And last thing is they say things like this when you try to talk honestly with them, such as, "That's not true. I never tell you what to do. You only have yourself to blame. I have done my best as your parent, and you should be grateful for how I raised you."
Oh, Lord.
Ew. It was ew to roleplay that.
So ill. So ill.
Like, and if you notice, like, what's the common denominator in all those phrases? It's finger pointing back onto you as the child.
Mm-hmm.
You are always the one in the wrong. And, like, maybe that's a point to recognize, listeners, of like, as you're thinking about your own relationship with your parents, right? How much of the time is it that the finger pointing gets turned back on you?
Yeah.
How much accountability do your parents take on for things that they do or say that's hurtful or not okay? Sometimes it can be very eye-opening to look at that.
Yeah, and also to see what you tolerate in other relationships.
Yeah.
Because those quotes, if you just take the child parent out of it, can be often said in romantic relationships. That's not true. I never do that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I don't feel like you're taking into account XYZ. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yeah. This is not just going to show up in, like, parent to you and you as a parent. This is going to show up in all relationships.
Oh, yeah. So, on that note, how having an EIP can affect your life as the adult child? We've kind of touched on them throughout our episodes so far. But it really teaches us that our need and emotions don't matter.
Yep. You are secondary.
Yeah, you're
if not lower on the totem pole.
That not only that you don't matter to these adults that are supposed to be caregiving for you, but you don't matter to yourself either.
Yeah.
Because they don't care. If they don't care, then why do I need to care?
Yeah.
Ugh, actual gross. As an adult, you are likely to question your thoughts and perspectives, doubt yourself, and have low self-esteem. Again, feeling unworthy, right? Not good enough. You feel often unheard, misunderstood, unloved, put down, and trivialized.
Yeah.
And that is a really tough way to develop in the world. Already feeling like alone. And that sense of belonging is not there.
Yeah.
It's hard for you to understand your needs and how to communicate them effectively. #yikes. You have a strong need for reassurance and validation from others to feel good about yourself. You may have this amazing support system that see things in you that you don't see in yourself, and you believe them. But sometimes it doesn't matter what they say, it's what you believe in yourself. Because then you're just depending on others to feel your well-being.
Yep.
And that's sometimes not always the healthiest thing to do. Nope. And lastly, you feel angry since you can't have an open, direct conversation with your parent. I can definitely relate to that.
It's hard. It's especially
So hard.
Like if you're an adult, right? Like figuring out how to have hard conversations or express emotions with people, and yet this parent figure who probably caused a lot of harm growing up, right? And kind of set these patterns into place. Like if they won't take accountability or have that conversation with you, it can feel very frustrating. Like, why am I the only mature one right now and I'm your child? Ooh.
Exactly.
Okay, but pivoting, right? Like not all hope is lost. Like there are things that adult children of EIPs can do to work on themselves and to heal. This is not just I grew up with a parent that was an EIP and it had an impact on me and I can never change anything. Like that's not true. Right? So the first thing is recognizing the issue. If you listen to this podcast and a lot of things resonated with you, right? Like recognize the issue. How did this show up in your own life, in your own relationship with your parents? And knowing that it is not your fault. It is not anything to do with you not being lovable, right? Like we need to stop and challenge this narrative that was almost like what we took on as from the way our parent or parents treated us, and recognize that their problems, right? Like the fact that they didn't know how to show love or process their own emotions or even how to be a healthy parent to you, like doesn't make you responsible. You had nothing to do with that. That is on them, and we have to hold people accountable. And in regard to that, we got to let them work on their own issues and we got to focus on ours. We are not going to have any control, right, responsibility to raise our parents. That was never our job, even if that was made to feel like it, right? Your job is to work on yourself so that these patterns don't repeat if you decide to have children, right? Or if you decide to be in any type of relationship. That is your job. Their behavior is linked to their own deep emotional issues. And that is not something that a simple, heartfelt conversation on your part or attempts can fix. Because if they're not willing to put in the work and work on it themselves, things aren't going to change on their side. And they got to process their own emotions and break their own patterns to overcome their own emotional immaturity. Again, that's not something that you can fix or was ever your job to fix, no matter if they try to tell you that it was, right? Nextly, we need to connect with our emotions. We need to recognize what our own feelings are, right? And this involves doing our own deep emotional work, such as going to therapy, right? Such as like actually sitting with your emotions, journaling, doing meditations, listening to this podcast, and doing some reflections around it. Right? We need to recognize that connecting with our true feelings can be really terrifying, especially if we suppress them or hid them for most of our life. We need to find emotional support in our loved ones, those that are supportive and emotionally mature enough to hold space for it and to have conversations that are helpful and not more harmful. And like I said, utilize therapy. This is going to help you understand your own emotions and really process like what were the challenges of growing up with an EIP, right?
Exactly.
Where might I have distorted cognition on my worth, or what was my responsibility and role growing up, and really practicing putting the accountability on said parent.
Yes. I love this next point because I really resonate with it. And it touches on the wounds that we experience from these types of parents. And relationships heal those relational wounds.
Yeah.
So those emotional wounds that we experienced in childhood with a parent like this can be healed through meaningful relationships. But if you're never experienced a deep, fulfilling relationship, you may not know what to look for or how your own behavior might affect it. And honestly, I started that journey with healing my wounds when I first started my counseling program way back when.
Way back.
And also not just doing that own personal work and therapy, but putting myself in those situations to be vulnerable and to develop those meaningful relationships. I literally told you this the other day. I was like, when we first met, I wasn't ready for our relationship. I wasn't ready for your friendship.
She wasn't.
And no, I wasn't. And that was like at the very beginning, the thick of it, when I was doing my own work.
Yeah.
But through not just our professional relationship, but our personal relationship, I've been able to heal those wounds of having meaningful relationships and knowing what they feel like, not just within myself, but how I show up. So thank you. You're awesome.
I'm not going to cry on this pod.
So, like Erin said, seeking therapy can help identify healthy relationship patterns, navigate the dynamics, cultivate meaningful interactions with others, assists in identifying destructive behavior patterns, learning productive communication skills, and establishing important boundaries in relationships.
And
Period.
no, that's not a lot. That is the bare necessity of what everyone deserves.
Yes.
Going into any type of relationship with another human.
Yes.
Point blank period. Thank you.
Love that. Yes. And something else that we already mentioned, but also super important, is meditation and mindfulness, those reflections, right? That practice of setting intentional time to give focus to taking care of yourself is vital. No one else is going to do it besides you.
Literally.
So let's get started. You can start anytime.
Yeah.
Mindfulness and meditation practices can help you connect to your deeper feelings, helps become more conscious of how you share your emotional experience with others, including your own children one day. Love that. So we're coming towards the end. How are we feeling?
I feel great.
Yes.
I feel like all the knowledge in my brain is power.
Yes. Actually, yes. So in the spirit of wrapping up and keeping up with the tradition of ending with a quote, we have this amazing quote by Lindsay Gibson from The Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents: How to Heal from Distant, Rejecting, or Self-Involved Parents book. Highly recommend that book.
Yes.
Love that book. I need to reread it. But she has this quote, and it says, if parents don't label their own behavior as abusive, their child won't label it that way either. Ooh. Ooh. Even as adults, many people have no idea what happened to them in childhood was abusive. As a result, they may not recognize abusive behavior in their adult relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't just stop once you grow up into an adult. It stays with you if we don't work on it.
Exactly.
So work on it.
Yes.
Everyone
work
needs to
on
work on
it.
their stuff.
Not just for yourself, but for our shared common humanity.
Literally, yes. You
We
all
can do
deserve
that.
to be able to work on your things. But with that, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up officially this episode. Thank you again for tuning in. I hope that this episode was just really informative and made you feel seen and heard if it needed to. And also that you take something away of, I deserve to be able to work on my stuff and not be responsible for my parents' own things, because that was never my job, no matter if I was made to feel it was.
Yeah.
And we hope that you stay tuned for next month's episode, which is, how do I politely decline this conversation, especially at the holidays? All the sarcasm.
Oh, yes. We need to prepare.
We have to prepare. So we hope that you stay tuned, subscribe, so you can get an alert when the episode drops. And we will see